Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. On behalf of Acting Director Michael Costigan of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, I'd like to welcome you. With all the current challenges that we're facing in our society today, and particularly law enforcement with the COVID-19, our thoughts are with you, your agencies, and your communities. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us for this webinar. We have a really good attendance, so thank you for that. My name is Tom Woodmansee, and I'm a Senior Advisor for CNA and BJ's Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, and I'm also a retired police officer. I'm very pleased to be providing a brief introduction for our webinar today that addresses an important topic relating to our body-worn camera program. We have an outstanding panel of experts who will be discussing body-worn compliance issues, reducing the risk of non-compliance, and looking at some best practices. This topic for today's webinar was identified based on questions and observations from agencies around the country on how we can best address compliance issues. And though the primary focus of the webinar will be on compliance and auditing, our panel will also discuss related considerations and best practices for you to be aware of with your body-worn camera programs. This is another in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program and the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit, and in a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies around the country in implementing their body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many ways, and we are grateful that they do. We also want to extend a thank you to the staff at CNA for their efforts in putting this webinar together. So just a few comments for your awareness before we begin. Please keep your phones on mute to avoid background noise. The webinar is recorded, so others may view it later on through our website. There will be opportunities for questions at the end of the webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. One of our goals of the webinar is to provide opportunities for you to network with each other and hear what you have to say. And if you'd like, you can use the chat utility to the right of your screen to post your questions and comments, or you can comment at the end of the webinar, and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it, so please complete the evaluation and give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And importantly, let us also know what other topics you think we should and could cover with future webinars. Let me now turn this over to our facilitator, Scott Haug, who is one of our body-worn camera subject matter experts and a former police chief. Scott will lead the webinar. Chief, all yours.
Tom, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be with everyone here today. We've got a lot of great information. We've got some great presenters here for this presentation over the next hour. And please, if you have some questions, go ahead and submit those, and we'll try to make some time at the end to be able to answer your questions and provide some closing remarks. Real briefly about me, I was a police chief in a mid-sized agency in Idaho. I spent about 32 years in law enforcement and have been involved in body-worn camera technology since about 2007, 2008. We started to use it in our agency. So I've had a lot of experience on how not to do things and how to do things. And so I'm really excited to, like I said, to be here with you today. As we see these body-worn camera projects grow across the country, one of the questions that we get all of the time is, what do we do with all of the data, all of the video that we're getting from our body-worn camera and in-car video systems? We've got a plethora of information, and is there some things that we can do with it? And that's what the topic today is about, is how do we reduce our risk and ensure that we're complying? How do we ensure that we are doing what we say we're going to do and use this body-worn camera video to reaffirm that? A lot of times agencies we hear from had a problem lying in wait that had they had a good review program in place, they may have been able to catch that. We see many times where officers are injured or killed in preventable incidences that if the agency would have done some reviews, they could have worked with that officer or their agency to improve training and reducing use of force. And I just can't stress the importance of not just letting that data sit, but making sure that you put a strong review program in place. I want to start real quick. You'll notice I'm using the word review program. There is a lot of different terminology out there revolving around this topic. And so I wanted to just take, as we get this program started, just take a little bit of time and talk about the terminology. So we hear compliance and we hear the term audit. And when we think of compliance, we think of sort of a self-verification. Are we doing what we say we should? Are we doing what we say we should be doing? And typically, a compliance review is done by a supervisor, and some of the speakers will touch on this more down the road. But a supervisor sitting down and somehow randomly selecting a video and reviewing it, and just making sure that the call went the way that the agency thinks the call should go. This is not about getting officers in trouble. This is very similar to a sergeant showing up on the scene of a call and being able to determine, is everything going the way that it should? And so we're looking for ensuring policies and procedures are being followed, and again, making sure that our policing mission is being accomplished. So that's sort of the overview of a compliance. Now, when we think of an audit, most people think of a financial audit. It's a little bit more of a deeper dive. And what we propose is that an audit is looking at your compliance review program, making sure that if you have a policy that your supervisors will review videos, let's say they're going to review 6 videos a week for sake of this conversation, making sure that that auditor is confirming that those reviews are happening. We don't want to have a critical incident or have an officer injured or have a preventable incident occur and come to find out that we weren't doing what we said we would do as far as the review program. It's a verification that the agency's goals and mission is being met. And the other thing that you're going to hear today from the speakers is written documentation is important. And again, not about getting officers in trouble, but just documenting that we've reviewed the videos, what we were looking for, and that we either didn't find anything or we did find something, and we took some steps to prevent that from happening again. And sort of my final thought on this too is I would encourage you that if you find your staff doing great things, that you recognize them for that. What gets recognized gets repeated. I'll never forget in one of our videos in our agency, we had an officer during a routine review. One of our sergeants found this officer out helping a citizen. We had a lot of snow in the community at the time, and the officer was out helping them shovel some snow. And it was something that the sergeant wanted to recognize, and it really, when it hit the public, it was such a great thing for that officer. And again, when we recognize that great behavior, it gets repeated. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chief Monroe to talk a little bit about what is a review program. So Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Rodney Monroe. I am retired Chief of Police from Charlotte, North Carolina. I also served as the Chief of Police in Richmond, Virginia, and Macon, Georgia, and I've spent 22 years with the D.C. Police Department. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you today, and as Tom and Scott have already said, that our well wishes are to you and your organizations as you fight through this COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully all of us can come out on the other side healthy and a lot wiser. What I'm here to talk about is the overview of the review process and what it is, and ultimately it's about making sure that what we say and what we expect to be done is being done. Some of the primary emphasis around the review is all of us have made enormous investments in the body-worn camera program, whether it's money, time, community, other partners' input. We want to make sure that those investments that we made are protected and are continued to be enhanced along the way. We want to ensure that our commitment to our community is there, open and honest and transparent process for citizens to be able to know that their interactions with police are what is to be expected, not only from the department, but also from the citizens. And, you know, as Scott mentioned a little earlier, it helps manage performance. we want to be able to identify that good work that our officers are out there doing. And especially if you have performance evaluation processes, it gives an opportunity to really to go back and make some concrete recommendations and the decisions on officers' performance, even in the areas in where you recognize that officers need some additional counseling, instruction, and things of that nature. It supports our training opportunities so that we are able to modify our training in a rather rapid and efficient manner based on what we're seeing during those reviews. There's certain objectives that are associated with body-worn camera reviews. Policy, quite naturally, is one of the primary ones. Are we following our policy? Does our policy need to be changed in any particular manner? Training, what are we doing? What are our opportunities to learn more? The uploading process, are we uploading in a timely fashion? Categorizing, are we categorizing properly to enable officers to associate their body-worn camera with events? We've heard all too often when you go to look for a certain body-worn camera, it's not matching up exactly with the event that took place. Storage is a big issue. Storage equates to money, and we want to make sure that we're storing the body-worn camera appropriately for the appropriate period of time, and that is also associated with retention. Are we purging that video in a timely fashion in order to manage our costs? Reviews are just really to help correct personnel and to ensure that the correct personnel are assessing this system for the right reason. And again, I mentioned highlighting the performance. Some of the scopes that we should be looking at within our reviews. What do we want to learn? What do we want to learn from it? It's not just, trying to play the gotcha game, but we really want to learn something through these reviews. And we want those within the organization to be able to learn through this technology and equipment that we put in their hands. Our officers being properly trained. What more needs to be done? What modifications do we need to make to our policies? Are we activating, deactivating it properly? Are we capturing and measuring our activation and deactivation percentages so that we can reach the highest percentage level so you don't have that incident whereby something serious happens and you're not able to show that video or to view that video because of the activation and deactivation. And again, we talk about the uploading and tagging. We all want to make sure that aligns with one another throughout our agency. Body-worn camera storage, again, that is a very critical element. The review approach, how should we go about approaching? How do we allow more people to see what they're capturing, who should be capturing that information? And there's 5 key categories that I want to reference. Quite naturally, officers should have some opportunity to review body-worn camera video just to ensure the accuracy of their reports. It gives them an opportunity to self-assess themselves and how they're interacting with the community, how do they better prepare themselves for court. Detectives, there's a wealth of additional evidence associated with body-worn camera, not just hearing what someone said, but being able to see things that are being observed out there on the street. Supervisors, great opportunity for training and counseling of our officers, both young officers and old officers, but it gives not just the anecdotal opportunity, but a real fresh live view of what's going. Are we using the proper tactics? What is the overall performance of the people that we're responsible for supervising? Managers, the next level within the organization, are they ensuring that the supervisors are reviewing the stated number of body-worn camera video? They're not just picking the shortest video or the easiest videos to review, but are going across the entire spectrum, uses of force, traffic stops, officer safety type issues, to make sure that the supervisors are managing that portion of the body-worn camera program. And we also have some type of quality control within our organization to make sure that those real accountability issues with categorizing, uploading, storage, and retention are occurring within the organization. For the last 5 years, CNA and BGA have partnered with over 420 body-worn camera agencies across the country, police departments, universities, correctional facilities, and we've seen a steady increase as it relates to supervisor reviews. We've gone from 94% in 2015 up to 99% in 2017, and that number is continuing to grow as we continue to assess the most recent 18-19 cases. One of the trends that we're really starting to see is those reviews really being based on performance. How are our officers doing out there? What are they learning? How are they interacting with people? And again, you can't manage what you can't measure, and body-worn cameras give you a great opportunity to measure performance. And we've seen a steady increase over the last 5 years as it relates to our body-worn camera sites and them being able to have more and more supervisor reviews of those cameras. I just kind of want to point out two agencies in particular that have very viable review process. The Lansing Police Department, they have a very vibrant process that allows both officers, supervisors, and the commanders to review. The chief has the ability to designate others within the organization and outside the organization to be able to review body-worn camera video as well. Berkeley Police Department, I call them out because they have very strong 4 levels of reviews that include supervisors, investigative section. They use it really as a teaching and learning tool where they pull down body-worn camera video, and almost every training exercise that they take their officers through, there's some reference to a body-worn camera video that they are able to show to their officers. Their attorney's office, both within the department and the city, review body-worn camera video to help really make sure that the city and the department are putting forth the best practices possible to not only minimize injuries to officers and others, but to limit the liability that the city incurs with something being done wrong out there. They're able to catch on body-worn camera video and be able to bring it back to the department to make sure that they're stressing those things during training. You know, many of you on today's call have policies governing who can review what types of body-worn camera video they have the opportunity to review. But it's critically important that we make sure that they include the who, when, and why to review this body-worn camera video so that you can continue to protect your investment and also ensure that your community will continue to support your efforts. Thank you. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Chief. Welcome to all our attendees. My name is Dan Zehnder. I'm a retired captain from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, where I served with them for 22 years. During that time, I was the body camera program manager from the inception of the program in 2014 for approximately 2.5 years. I'm also the president and founder of Principus Group, which is a body camera training and consulting company, and I've been an SME with the Training and Technical Assistance Team since its inception in 2015. So I thought the easiest way to discuss how to conduct body camera program audits was to pose a series of questions. So we'll start with the first one, which is, what is an audit? Well, simply put, an audit is an examination and evaluation of internal policies, procedures, and operations. Audits aim to test and prove that your compliance processes, in this case, body camera compliance processes, are being conducted effectively. Why are they important? Audits are looking at all the compliance program processes and documentations to ensure the things that we say we're doing are being done correctly and they're in line with department goals and objectives. The agency would have no idea if the compliance program is working as designed without doing an audit. This is especially true for the larger agencies. Additionally, audits prove that the agency is doing what they say they're doing in regard to their compliance program, and you can back it up with documentation, which I'll speak about a little bit later. So who does audits? Well, ultimately, audits are an agency-level responsibility. I can't emphasize that enough. An agency abdicates that responsibility down to a supervisor is doing so at its own risk. This is an agency-level process. They can be done either internally or externally. External auditors might be appropriate for larger organizations or in special circumstances, and I think you'll hear our next speaker talk about an example of one of those special circumstances. Internal audits can be conducted by people within the agency, as Chief Monroe outlined. Some of the larger agencies may already have certified auditors on staff. You don't, however, have to have a certified auditor to conduct an audit of your program. You just have to be trained to know what to look at and how to evaluate how well those things are being done. This formal process doesn't mean to say that informal auditing, especially in larger agencies, can't be done and designed at lower levels of the agency. If it is, those informal audits must be documented and sent up to the agency level. Now, I call them informal simply because you can't think of them as taking the place of a formal audit. So this may be, for example, a precinct commander that delegates down to his deputy inside the precinct to do a check to ensure that the processes that are being done inside the precinct are in alignment with the department's program. And that could be a subset of a formal department process, but it doesn't take the place of it. And audits, whether they're done internally or externally, whether they're formal or informal, should not be confused with taking the place of regular checks done by supervisors and and leaders at all levels of the agency. When should these audits be done? Well, this isn't a constant process. Once a year may be sufficient, though I'd recommend every 6 months or maybe even quarterly during the initial stages of your body camera deployment. Some states have legislation that clearly directs that agencies will conduct audits. It specifies time frames for those audits. So if you have some legislation in your state directing that, then of course obviously follow that. So how do we do these audits? Well, that certainly depends on what your compliance program looks like. The more comprehensive the program is, the more processes that are going to have to be checked. But every aspect of the compliance program should be examined. Every process, all supporting documentation, maybe even speaking with people involved in the process to ensure their understanding of their role in the process should be looked at. I like to think of this more of a bottom-to-top review rather than a top-to-bottom review, which brings me to a very critical point. Your compliance program, the steps that Chief Monroe talked about, those things in his presentation, and this audit process need to be written down. Now, you can put this in your body camera policy or you can put it in another policy appropriate to your agency, but it needs to be documented. Especially important, as I'll talk about in a minute, when that process comes into question by entities outside of the organization. So what are we looking for when we do an audit? At a minimum, the audit must look at all those compliance processes the agency says it's doing. So, for example, if the policy is that a first-line supervisor must look at X amount of videos of X amount of length, X amount of times a month, the audit will be looking to verify that these things were actually being done throughout the agency. They would pull CAD files, your body camera system management software reports, and other required supporting documentations. For example, those reports submitted by supervisors up their chain of command stating that they reviewed these videos and what they saw in them. Those would all be pulled to ensure that these things were being done, that they were being sent up the chain, that the command, they'd be looking at how the command acted on what was found in those videos and by who. And so they would also be looking at a level of verification that was done at the agency. So if the agency is saying that in their internal audits, they're looking at all these processes, that audit would confirm that indeed had been done. So, for example, if an agency determined that officer search and seizure law competence was an area of concern and directed supervisors during their reviews to focus on that, auditors would be looking to see if that happened. You know, how many videos were reviewed? What were their length? What was the type of incident? Were these the right numbers to review? Was the area of concern addressed, and items like that? The goal here is to verify an agency is doing what it says it's being that it's doing, and to help find deficiencies, if any, in the existing compliance program process. And again, I have to stress, this is not auditors looking at the contents of videos. They're simply looking to ensure that the processes were being followed in accordance with the agency directives. So what do you do with what you find in these auditing reports? The agency needs to review the findings and determine how best to correct deficiencies in the process. Again, this is process related. So it's correcting deficiencies in the process, or how best to reinforce or maintain the strengths found in the processes. So, for example, using the scenario of the supervisor reviewing videos and then sending a report up each month to through the chain of command. If that's a paper report and they find out during the auditing that 30% of those paper reports come up missing between the precinct and the department, then perhaps the recommendation would be, hey, we need to try to automate this. That's the kind of things they're looking at. Or if they have, and conversely, if they have an electronic process that's works very well and doesn't need to be touched, that auditing confirms that is a solid process for the agency. Not acting on findings of these audits simply allows deficient processes to continue and misses an opportunity to reinforce the positive processes. Finally, I want to talk about documentation. These auditors, certainly if they're external to the agency, there will be a formal written report. If it's internal, they need to complete detailed reports of the findings for the agency to act on. Audits are documented, so they'll provide validation to entities outside of the agency that things are being done in accordance with the policy and procedures, and that the agency is checking to verify that. It's not enough to say, oh, yes, we have our supervisors doing it and have that outlined in a body camera process, but then the agency comes under very close scrutiny in the event of a controversial incident, and then they find out that what our supervisors are saying they're doing isn't being done, and the question will be asked to the department, well, who was checking to ensure that what you said you were doing was being done? Much better to be able to produce auditing reports that show that the process has been ongoing and works efficiently. Finally, I want to tell you all that it's very important that you retain these reports. They surely will come in handy if the agency is questioned about the efficacy of this compliance review program. So retain those, keep them in accordance with your records retention policy for administrative files. I would say hold them for a minimum of 5 years, but certainly to follow your internal retention program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Captain Jeff Spiess.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Spiess, captain with the City of St. Anthony in Minnesota. My goal today is simply to give you some insight into how our department conducts an internal review of our body-worn camera program. Just some background on our department. We're a small department compared to others. We're 20 sworn personnel, first-ring suburb of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we really got serious about our body-worn camera program following a high-profile officer-involved shooting in 2016. Prior to that, we had and currently have cameras mounted in our squad cars. We had talked somewhat about getting body-worn cameras, but the cost for a department our size seemed to be insurmountable at the time. So in 2017, we were fortunate enough to receive a grant through the Department of Justice, the Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program grant, which was extremely helpful for us. We also, along with that grant, received a lot of support from CNA and BJA folks, similar to what we're doing today. So November of 2018 is when our program went live, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but following the officer-involved shooting, we had a lot of negative press and a lot of allegations that were frankly false, and we had a lot of calling from the public and frankly from our cops as well for the body-worn camera technology. And it made implementing our program, at least on a cultural level, a lot easier. After buying the products, issuing them to cops, getting them trained, we knew that we had to have a review process to ensure that the program was operating as dictated in policy. And we took the policy portion very seriously. One of the things we did right off the bat was convened a Tri-City work group that encompassed city council members, various members of the public, subject matter experts, and body-worn cameras. We also spoke to several stakeholder groups and let them provide some insight onto our policy as well. So in our policy, we put specifically how we would review our program, and knowing that that policy was developed by a number of individuals, we found it very important that we were following what our policy said and we were using cameras the way they were supposed to be used. So why do we review? Several reasons, and a lot of them have been covered already, but for us, we wanted to verify that our equipment was working properly. And one of the things that we found out very early on is that there's a lot of hardware and software in our squad cars that have to work nicely together for us to get product that we wanted. So essentially what we found out early on was that we were having issues with our body-worn cameras and our squad cameras syncing properly. We also had some Wi-Fi issues that squad cars, when they pulled into the garage, weren't uploading the body-worn camera video the way we wanted it uploaded. And so by having this review process set in place prior to starting the program, we were able to identify these issues early on. And we solved a lot of them, but it's an ongoing issue with the software and the hardware. But we also wanted to ensure that our officers were using the cameras according to policy, and we really haven't had much of a problem with that. I know I've heard from other agencies where there are some officers that do resist this technology, but as I stated earlier, there was a lot of good reasons for our officers to wear these cameras, and we even had some that demanded to wear their own personally purchased cameras prior to us getting our body-worn camera program going. So really didn't have an issue with that. We had some issues early on with just getting adapted to activating the camera and making that more of an automatic. And after about 2 or 3 months, that was quickly solved. So identify any training issues. So I'll talk about our process in a little bit here, but every time we review cameras or body-worn camera footage as part of our review process, we're looking for issues where there might be opportunities for training. And we also encourage officers, if they have a situation out on patrol where they think it would be good for the rest of the department to view that, to let us know. And we've used our body-worn camera recordings in use of force training and in other types of training. So we're also looking to praise great officer conduct. And one of the things that I really like about this is that it continues to build on that positive culture in our department for this technology. If all we're doing is looking for areas to critique or to nitpick officers, it's going to quickly be the body-worn camera program is going to quickly have a negative spin. So we're always looking for opportunities to do that. We also, in Minnesota, we're required to have an independent biennial audit. So we haven't had to do this yet. It's going to be coming up shortly. But one of the things that the auditor will be looking for is to ensure that our video is classified correctly, that it's retained and discarded when it should be, that we're accessing video for business purposes only. And that was one of the challenges early on for us, is trying to find a place to document every time we're viewing body-worn camera. So with the product that we have, it's not easy to document that within the software itself. So we have various areas that we record that information. So even if an officer wants to go back and review body-worn camera video just to refresh his or her memory of a specific call, they've got to document that in our records management so that we have that on file. And also, and probably most important, is transparency and trust with our public. And so as I said earlier, there were many people and many individuals that helped develop the policy that we have in place right now. And it was very important to us that we showed those individuals and our community that we're using the body-worn cameras in the way that we said that we would. And it's also, in addition, trust within our agency, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too, but our officers have to trust that we're using and we're viewing video for the right reasons. And I haven't, to this point, had anybody complain to me or any issues with that. So one of the other things that I think is really important, and I don't have it on a slide here, is educating your city leaders and public on the capabilities of your body-worn camera equipment. We all know that there's a human element involved as far as remembering to turn on the camera in rapidly evolving situations. Also, how do the cameras perform at night in running situations, inclement weather? And we've taken opportunities to present multiple times on our body-worn camera program to our city council and in public settings and showed them video, what it looks like when an officer goes on an alarm call, or what it looks like when it's raining, or what it looks like when they're in foot pursuit. And I just threw a slide up here, and this is not to call any department out because we've all got areas for growth as well as our agency does. But we see in the news and in other areas where agencies do have a body-worn camera program, but when there's a big incident and there's not camera footage available, it's easy to see that the public has little empathy for that and little understanding about why cameras weren't turned on. And the first thing it seems that they go to is that there's a cover-up or we're trying to hide something. So we see those things around us, and that was another thing that we said is we really have little room for error when it comes to ensuring that we're using our cameras the way that we're using them. So we took our review process and our policy in regard to that very seriously and wanted to make sure that it was done, that our process was good. So again, we have a 20-person department. This process may not work or may have to look a little bit different in your agency. But how we have it set up, we have 4 shifts, and each shift has a street supervisor. So what we have our supervisors do is they randomly review 2 videos for each officer on their shift. And so what they'll do is they'll go into our records management system, run a check on all the calls that an officer went on that month, to include the types of calls, and randomly choose 2 videos from there. And the reason we don't go just right away to the body-worn camera software is because we need to ensure that if there's a type of call that they went on where a body-worn camera video should be present, that it is. We also make it mandatory that the officer or that the supervisors are reviewing various types of video. So you can see where there may be a propensity to want to just view 2 videos a month of a short traffic stop versus a 30-minute domestic, but we need to have it on a wide spectrum of calls, and so that's something else that they do as well. When we're doing these reviews, we're indicating on a report, and I'll show you a copy of that in just a little bit here, but it indicates whether the audio and video were working properly, if the equipment was utilized according to policy, looking if the officer's actions were professional, and the way that we ensure that is we require the supervisors to watch the video from beginning to end, not skipping forward, not stopping halfway through. And then there's an opportunity at the bottom of the form to leave comments. And so some of that comments are if there's something that's exceptionally professional that they want administration to know, there's an opportunity for training, things like that. And then if there's any deviation from policy, the supervisor watches an additional 2 videos that month for that officer. The reason we're doing that is to ensure that there's not a pattern of conduct where the officers are intentionally not activating the camera, or if there's a training issue that we need to address, or a software or hardware issue. And we've had to do that from time to time, but again, I haven't run into a situation where I believe an officer has intentionally not activated their camera. Additionally, I review all videos, body-worn camera videos for our supervisors, our detectives, and we also have our CSOs that wear the cameras as well. So anybody that's out dealing with the public in our agency wears a body-worn camera. In the event that I have video, then our chief reviews that. All the individual reports made by the supervisors are forwarded to me. And again, I don't have that many videos a month. I may have 45. So I can see if there's a pattern of a certain sergeant only watching traffic stops or only watching the short videos, and I can address that. Again, haven't had that problem, but it's something that we're always, looking to ensure that we're doing it the right way. I compile a final report and forward it to the chief, and if there's any deviation from policy, he's provided a brief synopsis of what the issue was and how it was corrected. In addition to watching video for our review process, we also watch video in any officer complaint, any use of force incident. Again, as I said earlier, officers are allowed to watch video if they need to refresh their memory on a call or review it for that reason, as long as it's documented and it's for business purposes only. So you'll see here, this is a copy of the form that the officers fill out. I tried to make it as easy as I could. They hit a submit button at the bottom when they're done, and it goes directly to me. On the next slide over, just shows what the supervisor or the video review log is. This is a log that I fill out and keep on file. As stated earlier, it's important that you keep all of this documentation. And so I have documentation for every form that was filled out by a supervisor and sent to me, along with these video review logs since the inception of our program. And we report on our compliance rate annually, and also when we do our presentations, public presentations, we report on them as well. And it gives us, again, an opportunity to educate the public of why we're not at 100%. As it says on the slide here, we're all human. We strive for 100% compliance, knowing that we likely will not reach that goal. And in fact, if we do reach that goal, I'd be a little bit suspicious because, and I'll give you an example. Yesterday, the day before, I was looking into one where there was not video on a use of force encounter. And upon further review, it was evident that the officer was essentially forced into action and didn't have an opportunity to activate his camera. So I think that education of the public is really important. So in 2019, we had a 99% compliance rate. And again, as I said earlier, create an atmosphere of trust and accountability. We're a small department. A lot of the things that, when we have small issues, we can handle them informally. This is one that we really err on the side of being very formal with. We have a duty to the public to show that we're doing things the right way. We document every time there's a deviation from policy. It may not, if it's a human error, we'll still document it. It doesn't mean that the officer gets a written or verbal warning, but it is documented. And what we always tell our people is if we're not willing to police ourselves, someone else will. And we've had, and I'm sure every police department out there has had entities that would like to come in and oversee how you do business. And this is one that I think if we show them that we're doing things the right way, that we'll continue to be able to do that. So I thank you for this opportunity to share our process. I hope that it provides you with some things to think about, and I'm more than willing to share on an individual basis with anybody that wants more information. So thank you.
Captain, thank you very much. That was great information, and thanks to all of our speakers today. I think this is great information to take and go back to our agencies and try to ensure that we have good, robust review programs. At the end of this presentation, we will have contact information. The captain just mentioned you can reach out to him. We will get you his email address as well as all of our email addresses. So if you have questions down the road that you think of after this presentation, feel free to email us. But now is the great opportunity to ask some questions. So in the lower right-hand corner of your WebEx, you'll see a place to ask some questions. We've had some questions come in already, and we want to start answering those and get this discussion going. So feel free at this time to type in your questions there on the lower right-hand corner, and we will we'll start working on answering some questions over the next little bit of time we have. So Chief Spiess, I'm going to direct this one to you, and then maybe Captain Zehnder, both of you could answer it with Chief Spiess going first. Targeted versus random reviews, is it better to take the choice away from the supervisor? Could you each give your thoughts on that question?
I believe that certainly that's an agency decision, and the smaller agencies might be able to allow supervisors to do random reviews. But I firmly believe that for most agencies, the targeted review is a better way to do that. And the reason I feel that is it's these reviews that supervisors do is you should think of those as nothing more than another monitoring tool that a supervisor has. It's akin to a sergeant showing up on a call with their officers and just standing there watching them, how they do their job. And the supervisor makes those calls when they're out on the street. And so kind of the logic is, well, why can't they do that same thing with body camera video? The problem with that is what a supervisor picks, and again, the larger the agency you have, the more diversity you'll have, and what a supervisor thinks is appropriate, may end up missing the mark from an agency standpoint. I think it's important that the agency set parameters so that it ensures that it's getting a broad view of what the agency is looking for in these reviews. Otherwise, I know some in the early ages of the body camera programs, many agencies kind of left it up to officers or to supervisors, and said you will look at X amount of videos, and then what happened was they'd look at very short 30-second clips and said, well, I did my job. And that, I think, defeats the purpose of having a comprehensive review program. So I'm a believer in the targeted directive review process.
Good feedback. So we'll go to the next question that is out there. It says, is there a recommended percentage or schedule for reviewing video? For instance, so many per month per officer or a certain percentage of calls. Chief Monroe, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think what we need to start looking at is the volume as well as the various categories that your department is actually capturing, and trying to figure out a percentage that makes sense. That, you don't want a shift sergeant to spend 2 or 3 hours going through body-worn camera video, but whether it's based on a monthly percentage, you heard mentioned that a targeted approach is a little more exact. So now you know that you're focusing on traffic stops, uses of force, citizen complaints, whether it's certain types of calls for service. But the percentage can fluctuate depending on what the actual volume that you're bringing in. But you do want to have a good representation of the body-worn camera video that you're capturing in those various targeted areas. And then you can have some discussions about what is a reasonable percentage of body-worn camera. In our department, based on certain categories, we had anywhere between a 5 to 12% viewing range for certain targeted incidents. Quite naturally, use of force had a higher percentage than others. But, you just kind of have to figure that out, and just know that, again, the importance that you put behind it, you'll see a different quality of engagement at all levels, whether it's traffic stops, whether it's use of force, whether it's just day-to-day citizen interaction. We can't overemphasize. If you're measuring it, you're going to see some pretty positive outcomes.
Yeah, great information. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have another question here. I'm just going to open this up to the panel here. It says, are we aware of any agencies using their compliance and or audit functions to review compliance with the COVID-19 protocols? Identify good behaviors that they share with others, or develop COVID-related training videos? That's a very good question. To our panel, any feedback on that? Dan, we'll start with you, Captain Zehnder.
Yeah, I'm not personally aware of any agencies that are doing that, and you could certainly, I'm sure there probably are. You can certainly, just like any other function that a supervisor would be asked to look at, whether an officer's using proper sanitation, decontamination after a call, for example. That's something that an agency could certainly direct supervisors to do. Because of the speed of the COVID process, if you're only doing supervisory checks once a month, you may be missing the mark. And so in this current situation, it'd be one of those things where you'd probably want to direct your supervisors on a weekly basis to be making those checks to review certain things. But remember, this is time intensive for supervisors to be looking at a whole lot of processes. So the agency, if it's going to have this as part of a directive for supervisory review, should be very focused on what they're looking at.
Dan, I want to kind of reference that, and one of the things that I've seen and talked to a few chiefs about in reference to the COVID-19 in particular, especially those cities that have put in place the shelter-in-place ordinances or proclamations or whatever we want to call it, but they've been utilizing both body-worn camera as well as in-car camera, and I don't know whether this is based on policies or whatever, but videoing certain areas. for two purposes: to be able to identify areas where people may not be abiding by that particular ordinance. Because again, we got to be careful, because law enforcement is about to take on a role that we have not in a number of years, whereby we're going to start regulating citizen movement within our communities. But being able to capture areas that are abiding by it, where you're not seeing activities in parks or in storefronts or mall areas, things of that nature, to be able to not only report back internally, but from the city's perspective as a whole, to kind of be the eyes and ears for those decision makers to determine whether or not we're actually seeing the levels of compliance that are acceptable in order to prevent further spread of the virus. So that's just one that I've had an actual conversation with in a particular jurisdiction. There are some challenges out there, and I think that, officers that are being asked to enforce some of these compliance orders, their body-worn camera, can be a viable tool. But, if you're going to send your officers out there to do that, make sure they have some type of scripted conversation that they're looking to have for that enforcement.
Great information. Well, thank you, Chief, very much. So we got time for, I think, 2 more questions. The question is, would professional standard software such as IA Pro be an appropriate platform for storing review reports? So the question is, Captain Vaughn, in your agency, how do you store this information, and would a professional standard software be an appropriate platform for that?
So that's a great question. Again, another decision for the agency. I'm kind of hesitant to say embedding reports into software that may not be designed specifically for that. It depends. I guess it would depend on the format of these reports. A lot of them are going to be scanned reports. They're going to be PDFs and that sort of thing. So there's the agency can certainly can make decisions as where basically to store them. The key, I would think, would be that they have to be stored somewhere that the agency has quick access to, and that those files are following retention. Because the last thing we want to do is have, again, larger the agency, the bigger the challenge this is, and not to be able to produce these review reports. So it may be appropriate. I guess it would depend on the type of software and the functionality of the software. Not a bad idea, but sometimes that, just scanning stuff in and embedding it in with those software programs are a challenge. I know we had a problem in Las Vegas years ago with an older version of IA Pro of integrating body cameras video into that system. So it's really an integration issue along with the volume issue.
I would add to that. Just want to add to that. That you want to be careful, because you don't want to bring the idea that you're storing it in an IA type of software program, and even though you may not be using it for that purpose, but when officers hear that some of their body-worn camera video is being stored in an IA Pro, then you may create some fear or concerns out there. It could be a very viable system for doing it. I'm not overly aware of what that system entails, but just the whole IA connotation could give you some pushback.
Chief, that's a very good a good thought as well. Is we want to make sure that these reviews are not perceived by the officer as they're going to get in trouble, or they're going to go in their file every time something happens. They're more for rudder taps and making sure the agency is headed in the right direction, and we're identifying issues as they come up. So some great thoughts there. So we have just a few seconds left. I'm going to turn this last question to Captain Zehnder just real briefly. The question is, concerning an outside audit, is there a certain agency size where that becomes recommended, or is it more important to consider overall public expectation?
Another great question. I don't think agency size matters when it comes to outside audits if the environment dictates that it should be external. Again, some agencies are required by state mandate to have external audits. You may be a large agency that's it's more functional to have somebody from the outside do it. And then you may be a small agency that's in a situational environment that, that the agency reviewing itself comes into question. So it might be advisable for to have an outside auditor come in. I think that what goes along with that is, yes, public expectation is important. So if an agency has great police community relations, an internal audit may not be an issue. However, if you're in an agency that has challenges with that, perception of credibility, having somebody from the outside come in and do it is probably a good call for the agency.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone for participating. But before you go, we've got a couple of, there's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to this website, or this webinar is recorded. But we also are excited to announce the BJA Body-Worn Camera 2020 solicitation. So please visit this website. If you're interested in a grant opportunity, BJA is taking applications now, so read through that. It's a wonderful program, and I would just encourage everyone to visit that website and take a look at the solicitation. And then as we go to the resources slide, please take a look at that. And again, thank you very much to all of our participants and all of our speakers, and I'm going to turn it back over to Tom for some closing thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott, Rodney, Dan, and Jeff, and very good information. And you covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about, Scott, so thank you for that. Our goal for the webinar was just to provide you with helpful information and insights on body-worn camera compliance and auditing. Just a reminder, as Scott mentioned, please take a look at the resource slide, as well as the BJ's 2020 solicitation to fund additional programs. It ends on May 5th, and please share this information. So, as you heard today, understanding the importance of compliance and auditing goes to so many aspects related to the credibility of your body-worn camera program. We hope you found the webinar helpful, and a reminder to please complete the evaluation. I'd like to just send a special thank you to David Lewis from BJA, as well as Carrie Shelton and Bridget Bryson from CNA for their leadership and all the behind-the-scenes work that went into orchestrating the webinar. Thanks again to our panelists, BJA and OJP, for making this possible. And thank you all for your service, especially at this pivotal point in time. We wish everyone to please stay safe and healthy, and take care. Thank you all.